Get ready for a pulse-pounding ride. In this gripping tale, a lone truck driver named D. Down crosses paths with a fearsome biker gang called the Steel Vipers. Little do they know, Dee is a former Navy SEAL, trained to handle high-stakes missions under the harshest conditions. When the gang tries to intimidate her, she unleashes a flurry of takedowns that leaves them stunned and scrambling for cover. It's the kind of underdog showdown you won't want to miss. Curious about how Dee went from a quiet life on the open road to battling a ruthless gang? We've got you covered. Tune in for the full story to discover every heart-stopping moment, from tense standoffs to cunning tactics that only a seasoned special ops warrior could pull off. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more thrilling stories like this to life. Stay tuned for more action-packed content. Diana Dee Harrington eased her 18-wheeler into the parking lot of a dusty roadside diner called Molly's Stopover, a place that hardly caught anyone's attention unless they were looking for an out-of-the-way burger joint or seeking a quiet patch of highway to break their journey. The afternoon sun blazed overhead, casting wavy heat ripples across the asphalt. Dee switched off the rumbling engine and sighed, letting her shoulders relax from the tension of the long haul she had just completed. She was no stranger to solitude. In fact, she thrived on it. Driving trucks provided her with a sense of peace, a continuous forward motion that left little room for the ghosts of her past to intrude. Stepping down from the cab, Dee adjusted her worn baseball cap, the black brim bearing a faded logo of a trident, a subtle nod to her old life. She had learned to move with the grace of a cat despite having a sturdy frame, and those who paid close attention might notice her measured steps or the honed posture that hinted at something more formidable than just a trucker's routine ritual. Yet she rarely drew that kind of scrutiny. She exuded an unassuming presence that let her blend seamlessly into the background of diners, truck stops, and delivery depots. Inside Molly's Stopover, the air conditioning was a welcome relief. The place smelled of stale coffee, fried bacon, and grilled onions. A few regulars sat scattered around the booths, mostly tired truckers or local farmhands grabbing a quick meal. Molly, the owner, offered a nod and a small wave from behind the counter. Dee responded with a friendly smile. She wasn't exactly a local, but she passed by often enough on her routes that Molly recognized her. She settled into a corner booth, preferring to keep her back against the wall so she could see the entire room, an old habit. Her gaze swept across the other patrons, gauging them in a glance. Nothing out of the ordinary. An elderly couple sharing a plate of fries, a young waitress refilling coffee cups, a radio playing low country tunes. It was the kind of quiet, out-of-the-way atmosphere that Dee had come to appreciate after years of living with ear-splitting noises and constant alerts in her previous career. Here, she could breathe. But even though the environment seemed restful, Dee couldn't shake the slight prickle at the back of her neck. It was the same intuition that had kept her alive more times than she cared to admit, a finely tuned awareness that always seemed to warn her if something was about to go sideways. She shrugged it off for the moment, chalking it up to the exhaustion of the road. When the waitress approached to take her order, Dee asked for black coffee and a tuna melt. The waitress jotted it down, offered a polite nod, and shuffled away. Across from Dee, a TV mounted in the corner flickered with local news. Headlines scrolled past about small-town events, agricultural fairs, and a brief mention of a local biker gang causing trouble near the state border. Dee noted it silently. She hoped it was just a passing mention. Trouble was the last thing she wanted. Outside, her rig waited, its engine ticking as it cooled. For a moment, Dee leaned back and let her mind wander. She considered how many more miles she'd have to drive before reaching her next drop-off. It was a routine day, or so she thought. She was just one more truck driver on the highway, and this was just another stop. She never guessed that soon enough, her tranquil world on the open road would collide violently with the chaos she thought she had left behind forever. Dee had never been one for idle chatter about her past, but a person's history has a way of surfacing, even when they work hard to bury it. Those close to her, what few there were, knew she had served in the Navy. Fewer still were aware that she'd been among the first women to complete the rigorous training pipeline to become a Navy SEAL. Officially, her records were sealed, blacked out in all the sensitive places by the government's thick marker. The rumor mill, however, was adept at weaving narratives around any woman who seemed to tread unexplored ground. She remembered how it all began. Fresh out of a small-town high school, drawn by the promise of discipline and challenge in the Navy, she excelled in every test and quickly rose in rank, her calm under pressure and razor-sharp instincts catching the eyes of her superiors. When the door cracked open to let women attempt the infamous SEAL training, she jumped at the chance, determined to prove that she was as capable as any man. She endured the brutal weeks of physical and psychological torment, forging her spirit in the crucible of buds. Night swims in icy waters, endless push-ups on scorching sand, carrying logs that weighed as much as her entire body mass, she persevered through it all. Dee Dee rarely broadcasted these facts. She told no tall tales at the diner counters, didn't regale fellow truckers with war stories, and never wore her past accomplishments on her sleeve. For her, the act of proving herself had been personal. It was a way to show she could ascend to the highest levels of martial discipline, then quietly slip away when she chose to. She'd seen enough violence on missions that spanned the globe, from clandestine ops in desert landscapes to rescue missions in frigid waters. Eventually, she decided she'd had her fill. Trucking was an escape. It was a straightforward life. Drive freight from point A to point B, follow the schedule, mind the road, handle logistical headaches that came her way. There was a solitude to it, a chance to breathe in the diesel-tinged air and watch the horizon stretch out endlessly before her. She valued the simplicity. No one saluted her, no one barked orders, and she didn't have to worry about lethal ambushes on a nightly basis. But the mind is rarely at rest when a person has seen the things Dee Dee had seen. She would wake in the middle of the night sometimes, drenched in sweat, reliving moments of adrenaline-fueled chaos. The clang of metal, the snap of rifle fire, the pounding of blood in her ears. These sensations never fully left her. She learned to live with them, though, turning the memories into silent companions. Now, as she waited for her tuna melt in Molly's stopover, she brushed those memories aside. She reminded herself that the intangible tension she felt was probably just old instincts flaring up. It was routine, a leftover from the days when letting your guard down for a moment could be fatal. Yet the TV news broadcast about the biker gang had unsettled her. She'd heard rumors circulating among truckers about a group known as the Steel Vipers. They traveled in packs, often intimidating local business owners or lone travelers. "Stay out of their way," one driver had warned her once. "They can smell weakness." Dee Dee had nodded politely at the time, fully aware she was no average trucker. But she had hoped she would never need to prove that. Life on the road was meant to be her respite, not a stage for renewed conflict. Finishing her meal, Dee Dee paid Molly at the counter, exchanged a bit of friendly small talk, and headed back to her truck. She took a moment to inspect her tires, an ingrained precaution that also served as a chance to scan the area. The parking lot was mostly empty, save for a few cars and a dilapidated van that looked like it had seen better days. The sun still beat down mercilessly, and the heat shimmered over the highway beyond. She climbed back into the driver's seat, started the engine, and listened as the deep rumble brought a sense of reassuring familiarity. Checking her side mirrors, she pulled out onto the highway and settled into a steady pace. The next few hours were uneventful, just miles of black asphalt, occasional radio chatter, and scenery that alternated between open plains and small clusters of trees. But as dusk began to settle, painting the sky in strokes of orange and purple, Dee Dee noticed something peculiar in her rearview mirror. A group of motorcycles, maybe 4 or 5, seemed to be traveling in the same direction, gradually closing in on her rig. She told herself it was probably nothing, just a crew of bikers enjoying the open road. After all, the highways at sunset often attracted riders seeking a sense of freedom and camaraderie. Still, a knot tightened in her stomach. The bikes came up alongside her, their engines roaring in a synchronized symphony of steel and horsepower. Glancing out the window, she caught sight of one rider's vest emblazoned with a menacing emblem, a coiled viper superimposed on a steel gear. The Steel Vipers. The very name that had featured in hushed whispers at truck stops for months now. Dee Dee's pulse kicked up, but she maintained a steady hand on the wheel. She had no intention of provoking them or appearing intimidated. One of the bikers, a lean man with a patchy beard and long hair escaping from under his helmet, revved his engine, and gestured at her window. His grin was less friendly and more predatory. Dee Dee's response was to keep her gaze forward and maintain her speed. She wouldn't engage unless she had to. Instinct told her that these men were looking for an opportunity. Any sign of fear or anger would serve as an excuse to escalate. After a tense minute, they peeled away, roaring up ahead. She watched as two of them sped off into the distance, while the others lingered behind her trailer for a moment before eventually speeding off themselves. Only when they were well ahead did she allow herself a small breath of relief. Maybe it was just a passing interaction, nothing more than a display of macho swagger on the road. Still, the tension in her neck remained. She considered her options. The next major truck stop was about an hour away. She could press on and park there for the night, among other big rigs, where numbers might offer some sense of security. Alternatively, she could pull into a smaller rest area sooner and hope to avoid further encounters. Neither choice was particularly comforting. The Steel Vipers had a reputation for unpredictability, and that fleeting highway encounter might have been a mere appetizer for something more dangerous yet to come. Dee Dee decided on the safer bet, a larger truck stop that was frequented by commercial drivers. She reasoned that the presence of more witnesses would deter the bikers from trying anything openly hostile. When she finally pulled in, the parking lot was well lit, brimming with rows of semis and dotted by smaller vehicles. The fluorescent glow from the gas pumps and the neon sign for the 24-hour convenience store cast sharp shadows across the asphalt. She found an empty slot near the far corner, cut the engine, and hopped down. Despite the bustle, she felt more comfortable knowing there were people around. Truckers milled about, some checking their loads, others chatting in small clusters, sipping coffee or energy drinks to stave off fatigue. Dee Dee locked up her cab and made her way inside the convenience store to grab a bite and maybe another cup of coffee. She wandered through the aisles, chips, jerky, sodas, all the usual roadside fare. Choosing a turkey sandwich and a bottle of water, she headed toward the counter. Behind her, the glass doors slid open, and in walked two men wearing motorcycle jackets emblazoned with the same Steel Vipers insignia. Dee Dee felt her heart lurch, but she kept her expression neutral. She sidled up to the cashier, paid for her items, and slipped away, making minimal eye contact. From the corner of her vision, she saw the men scanning the store. One was tall, muscular, with a shaved head and tattoos running down his arms. The other was shorter, broader, sporting a thick mustache. She couldn't hear their conversation, but the tension in the air was palpable. She didn't think they had recognized her as the driver of the big rig they had teased on the highway, but she wasn't willing to take that chance. Outside, she moved quickly yet casually toward her truck. Passing a cluster of fellow drivers, she nodded a brief greeting, wanting to keep up appearances of normalcy. As she neared her rig, she did a brief walk-around, checking everything under the guise of a typical safety inspection. Inside her mind, she calculated steps, gauged potential escape routes, and thought about the contents of her locked storage compartment in the cab. Objects she hoped never to need, a small arsenal of personal defense items, and a carefully tucked-away pistol, all legally owned, of course, but rarely used. 10 minutes later, she was seated in the driver's seat, door locked, scanning the mirror. She glimpsed the two bikers stepping out of the store, glancing over the rows of trucks. One pointed in her general direction, and her stomach clenched. The reason for their interest could be any number of things, but Dee Dee's instincts told her this was trouble. Then came the moment she dreaded. The tall one made a beeline for her rig. Dee Dee's chest tightened. It seemed they intended to approach her directly. She decided to lower her window just enough to speak, keeping one hand near the console where she had quick access to her baton and pepper spray, measures that, while less lethal than a firearm, might buy her precious seconds if the situation escalated. "Evening," she called out calmly, her voice tinged with a polite firmness that could shut down idle conversation. The tall biker surveyed her. "Hey there, pretty lady," he said, voice dripping with condescension. "We saw you roll in. That's a mighty fine rig you got." Dee Dee didn't respond right away. She simply nodded, her mind already cataloging exit routes and potential counters if he made a move. The second biker hung back, scanning the area, looking for watchers. In that silent moment, Dee Dee's training flickered to life. She was no longer just a truck driver, sipping water in her cab. She was a SEAL, and her senses were on high alert. The tall biker placed a hand on her truck's door, an oddly intimate gesture for a stranger. Dee Dee fought the urge to recoil, opting instead for an outward calm. "Help you gentlemen with something?" she asked, injecting just a trace of annoyance into her tone to warn them not to push too far. He offered a crooked grin. "We're always looking for new friends out here on the open road. Name's Clay. My buddy here is T-Bone." He jerked his chin toward the mustached man standing a few feet back. "And we represent the Steel Vipers. You heard of us?" Dee Dee kept her expression neutral. "I might have," she replied, keeping it vague. She didn't want to appear too interested or too ignorant. Clay gave a theatrical nod. "Thought so. Figured you'd like to hear about some protection opportunities. You know, times are rough on these highways. Accidents happen, cargo goes missing. It's a shame." He let the implication hang in the air. So that was their angle, an old-school protection racket. Dee Dee had heard from other truckers that groups like the Steel Vipers sometimes extorted drivers with thinly veiled threats. "Pay up, or your rig might not make it to its destination in one piece." "I drive alone," Dee Dee stated simply, looking him square in the eye, "and I manage just fine." Clay tilted his head, the grin vanishing as he read her dismissive stance. "Well, maybe this will change your mind." He reached into his vest pocket. Dee Dee's muscles tensed, but he merely pulled out a grimy flyer with the gang's logo stamped in the corner. "If you run into trouble, we'll be around," he said, tapping the paper. "Of course, a small contribution to the cause helps us keep the roads safer for folks like you." Dee Dee glanced at the flyer but didn't take it. "I'll keep that in mind," she said curtly. The tension spiked. Clay's eyes narrowed. T-Bone shifted, and Dee Dee could sense the man's impatience. He looked like he wanted to flex some muscle right then and there, but Clay was apparently the one calling the shots. After a moment's pause, Clay gave a nonchalant shrug. "Suit yourself," he said. "We'll see you around, lady." They turned and walked away, but not without throwing one last glance over their shoulders. Dee Dee watched them go, her jaw set tight. The air around her felt charged, as though some invisible boundary had been crossed. She exhaled slowly, reminding herself to keep calm. Drawing attention to herself in a crowded truck stop would only complicate things, possibly putting innocent bystanders at risk. For a long moment, she remained in her seat, the slip of paper lying on the ground outside her door. Finally, she eased the door open and hopped down. She stomped on the flyer, crushing it under her heel. Protection? She didn't need that from a couple of gang enforcers. She'd survive far worse. Still, a part of her knew that men like Clay and T-Bone rarely took no for an answer. The shadows lengthened as the sun dipped below the horizon. Dee Dee checked her watch, time to grab what sleep she could before hitting the road again. But even as she climbed into the small bunk behind her driver's seat, she found herself scanning the darkness outside, half expecting the roar of motorcycles to come swarming in. The memory of her old life pulsed in the back of her mind. She prayed it wouldn't be necessary to revisit those skills. But if it came down to it, she knew exactly what to do. Morning light crept in, revealing an overcast sky that threatened rain. Dee Dee roused herself from a restless sleep, every muscle tight as if her body had unconsciously braced for an overnight confrontation that never came. She went through her usual routine, a splash of cold water on her face in the truck stop's restroom, a quick check of her rig's fluids, tires, and load security. The presence of the Steel Vipers last night still weighed on her mind. She climbed back into the driver's seat, determined to get on the road early and put as much distance between herself and the gang as possible. As she pulled out, she glanced around, half expecting to see those motorcycles perched somewhere like vultures. She saw no sign of them, which brought a sense of relief, but the knot in her stomach refused to loosen. The next few hours passed in a haze of highway miles, the hum of the diesel engine, and crackling AM radio stations. Clouds gathered overhead, and a drizzle soon turned into a steady downpour. Visibility became an issue as rain pelted the windshield. Dee Dee slowed her speed, focusing on the road, ignoring the swirl of thoughts that threatened to pull her into worry. As noon approached, she decided to stop for fuel at a small service station in a town that barely registered on the map. The place had two pumps, a single building that functioned as both the cashier's booth and a snack shop, and a mechanic's garage around the back. When she stepped out of the truck, the smell of wet pavement and diesel filled the air, merging with the scent of pine from the nearby woods. She filled her tank, then went inside to pay. The attendant, A wiry man wearing thick glasses gave her a polite nod. Truckers don't usually stop here, he remarked. Most pass on through to the bigger station down the road. Needed to refuel, Dee said, forcing a friendly smile. She pulled out her card to pay, then paused as a TV behind the counter caught her eye. Local news was on, pictures of a spate of robberies and vandalism allegedly linked to a biker gang flashed on the screen. Though the station didn't name the group, Dee could guess. She paid quickly and stepped outside, the hair on the back of her neck standing on end. And there they were. Parked along the side of the narrow road, a half-dozen motorcycles idled. Rain dripped from their handlebars as the riders huddled beneath an awning for a closed cafe across the street. Dee froze for a fraction of a second, then forced herself to move casually. She told herself that there could be other gangs around, but deep down she knew these were the Steel Vipers. Her day was about to get complicated. She climbed into her truck, started the engine, and tried to pull out onto the road. But one of the bikers revved his bike, rolling out to block her path. The others quickly followed suit, positioning themselves in a loose semicircle. A flicker of anger sparked in Dee's chest. She'd seen intimidation tactics like this in war-torn regions overseas. The approach was different, but the underlying strategy was the same. Corner your target, leave them with no easy way out. The rain tapped incessantly on the windshield, matching the rapid thud of her heartbeat. She had hoped to avoid a direct clash, but it seemed the Steel Vipers had different plans. In the reflection of her side mirror, she spotted two more bikes pulling in from the rear, boxing her in completely. Outside, the lead rider dismounted, his eyes fixed on her cab. Dee clenched the steering wheel. If they thought she was an easy mark, they were about to learn otherwise. Dee's breath came slow and measured as she told herself to remain calm. The tension mirrored scenarios from her past, but this time there was no mission objective or chain of command to guide her. She was on her own. She shifted the truck into neutral, applied the air brakes, and let the engine idle. Steadying herself, she reached over to the passenger seat where she kept a reinforced baton. Pepper spray was clipped to her sun visor. If things escalated beyond that, she had a more lethal option locked away. But she prayed it wouldn't come to that. The lead biker, Clay, approached her door. Even through the rain-speckled window, she recognized the same smug expression from the previous night, though now it looked more menacing. T-Bone and another biker flanked him, their arms crossed over rain-drenched leather vests. The reflection of the Steel Vipers emblem glistened in the wet gloom. Dee rolled the window down a few inches, just enough to hear them. Rain dripped from the edges of the cab's metal frame. Her body coiled, ready to react at a moment's notice. "Morning, sunshine," Clay mocked. "Seems like we just keep bumping into each other, huh?" Dee's lips were set in a firm line. "Roads are public," she replied, voice level. "Not my fault if we happen to choose the same route." Clay let out a low chuckle. "Funny thing, though, you turned down our offer of protection, and now, well..." He made a grand gesture around the gas station. "This is about as far from protection as you can get." The statement bristled with implied threat. A handful of the other bikers began closing in, some still astride their motorcycles, engines rumbling. They were effectively corralling her, making sure she had nowhere to run. Dee's gaze darted toward the station attendant inside. Through the glass window, she saw the man looking out anxiously, phone in hand. Would he call the police? Even if he did, they were likely miles away from any decent law enforcement presence. "You'd be smart to reconsider our arrangement," Clay continued, leaning in as if confiding a secret. "We can make your life a lot easier, or a whole lot harder." Dee clenched her jaw, forcing herself to keep composure. She thought about diffusing the situation, maybe paying them off, though the idea made her stomach churn. Giving in would only feed their sense of power, and they'd return again like wolves scenting fresh blood. Another part of her, the trained seal inside, demanded she stand her ground. But she had to pick her moment carefully. A misstep could lead to bullets flying, and she couldn't guarantee innocent bystanders wouldn't get hurt. The rain intensified, hammering the asphalt. One of the bikers revved his engine, causing an echo to bounce off the small buildings. Clay's grin morphed into a sneer. "Time's running out, lady," he said. "We either come to an agreement, or my boys and I are going to have to teach you a lesson." In her rearview mirror, Dee noticed a flash of movement. The station attendant pushing open the door slightly, peeking out. She couldn't afford to wait much longer. Danger was stacking up second by second. She drew a slow breath and spoke evenly. "You want me to pay you, is that it?" Clay nodded, eyes gleaming as though he had already won. "That's right. Just a little something to show your gratitude. Ain't that right, fellas?" A murmur of assent rose from the cluster of bikers. Dee Dee's heart hammered against her ribs. She'd faced terrorists, pirates on the high seas, hardened smugglers in remote deserts. The principle remained the same: never give up the high ground. She pretended to reach for her wallet, but instead she wrapped her hand around the baton hidden behind the passenger seat. The tension in the air was electric. Any second now, a spark would ignite it. Dee Dee rolled the window down a little farther, carefully concealing the baton in the shadows of the cab. Outside, the thunder of motorcycle engines reverberated through the pouring rain. Clay shifted his weight as if anticipating an easy payday. The other bikers, slick with rain, fanned out like predators, waiting for the Alpha's signal. "All right," she said calmly, as if yielding. "Let me step down and get my wallet from the storage compartment. Might be easier than rummaging around in here." Clay's eyes flickered with satisfaction. He stepped back a foot, but his stance remained aggressive. "That's more like it, sweetheart." Dee Dee cut the engine and unlatched her seatbelt. Every motion was deliberate, calculated. She cracked the door open, stepping down onto the wet pavement. The air was thick with tension, the kind that precedes violence. Rain soaked her hair and jacket almost instantly. Her mind raced through the next steps. Surprise was her best weapon. She would disorient them, then disable as many as possible before they could draw firearms. Without question, at least a couple of them were armed. Biker gangs often carried knives or guns. In close quarters, however, a skilled operator could neutralize threats swiftly, provided they kept their nerve and exploited confusion. She walked toward the side of her truck, baton concealed along her leg. Clay trailed her, an arrogant swagger in his step. T-Bone and the others watched closely. The attendant inside the gas station looked on, eyes wide. The tension in the atmosphere felt like a coiled spring about to snap. Suddenly, Clay reached out and grabbed her shoulder. "Not so fast," he growled. "Don't try anything stupid." Dee Dee spun on her heel. With fluid precision, she swung the baton upward. It connected with Clay's wrist in a quick, snapping motion, forcing him to release his grip as he let out a pained yell. The move was so fast that for a split second, the rest of the gang simply gaped, unsure what had just transpired. One heartbeat later, chaos erupted. T-Bone lunged, but Dee Dee sidestepped, delivering a sharp thrust of the baton to his solar plexus. He doubled over, coughing. Another biker dashed in, brandishing a knife. Dee Dee pivoted, whacking the inside of his forearm to disarm him. She followed up with a swift elbow to his jaw, sending him staggering backward. The rain turned the asphalt slick, but her SEAL training kicked in. Every movement was economical, each blow designed for maximum effect. Two more bikers rushed in, but they collided with each other in their haste. Dee Dee capitalized, using low strikes to disable their knees. She moved like a ghost through the torrent of water, never staying in one place long enough to become an easy target. Clay recovered, clutching his throbbing wrist, face contorted in rage. He pulled out a pistol, aiming it wildly. Dee Dee's muscles tensed. This was the moment she dreaded. One stray bullet could spell disaster. She ducked behind the rear axle of her truck as gunshots cracked the air. Sparks flew where bullets ricocheted off metal. When Clay paused to re-aim, Dee Dee sprang up, baton in hand, and smashed it against the pistol. The gun flew from his grip, skittering across the pavement. With a speed that belied her career as a quiet trucker, she launched a brutal kick into Clay's chest, sending him sprawling. Rain splashed around his prone form, the aggression draining from his expression as he realized he was outmatched. Muffled groans rose from the bikers who had already tasted Dee Dee's strikes. Those still standing eyed her with a mix of shock and fear. T-Bone reached for his weapon, but thought better of it when Dee Dee fixed him with a steely glare. Baton still raised, her posture unwavering. In the sudden hush, the sound of the rain seemed deafening. Dee Dee's chest heaved with adrenaline. She knew this wasn't over. Maybe she'd bought herself time, but the Steel Vipers would not forget such a humiliation. Still, for this moment, she stood victorious, an unassuming truck driver revealing the formidable warrior within. A cough broke the silence. Clay's voice rasped with pain as he sat up, cradling his wrist. "What? Who the hell are you?" He managed to spit out. eyes ablaze with a mixture of anger and something close to awe. Dee Dee didn't answer directly. Instead, she kept her baton raised, scanning the scene to ensure none of the bikers tried for a second round. The ones still conscious wore expressions of disbelief that this lone woman, whose daily uniform consisted of jeans and a ball cap, had taken them down so decisively. Her adrenaline still pumped, but discipline kept her steady. She slowly backed away, making a wide arc around the bikers on the ground. She could see headlights in the distance, a nipa or maybe a truck approaching. The station attendant hovered near the entrance, phone in hand, likely having called the local sheriff by now. Dee Dee didn't want to be around when the cops arrived, not because she'd done anything wrong, but because answering questions about her background might invite scrutiny she'd rather avoid. Rain soaked her to the bone as she moved to collect Clay's pistol. She tucked it inside her jacket for the moment, removing the immediate threat from the scene. "Stay down," she warned, voice low and controlled, sweeping her gaze across the battered group. Somewhere behind her, T-Bone groaned as he stumbled to his feet, gripping his ribs. "We'll find you," he growled, spitting out a mixture of blood and rainwater. "We'll hunt you down." Dee Dee didn't bother responding. She knew too well the type of man who uttered such threats. They lived for intimidation, for projecting fear. If anything, she felt a twinge of sadness that people like this were so easily drawn into cycles of violence. But she couldn't dwell on that now. She returned to her truck, baton still in hand, keeping one eye on the bikers. Climbing up into the cab, she slammed the door shut and locked it. The rig roared to life as she turned the key, windshield wipers swishing furiously to clear the downpour. For a split second, she caught her reflection in the rearview mirror. Eyes hardened, hair plastered against her forehead, jacket slick with rain. The old Dee Dee, the Navy SEAL, stared back at her. She recognized that fierce glint, the unwavering determination to survive no matter the odds. Part of her wished she could have settled this with words, but the Steel Vipers had made it clear words weren't on the table. She glanced once more at the battered men lying on the ground. Then she pressed on the gas. The truck lurched forward, away from the small station, leaving the bikers behind in a swirl of mist and rain. The taillights of her rig vanished into the gloom, and she didn't look back. Her heart pounded against her ribs, adrenaline racing through her bloodstream. She had won the skirmish, but the war was far from over. She knew men like Clay and T-Bone would regroup, possibly with more members. She'd just put a target on her back. As the highway stretched out before her, Dee Dee inhaled a shaky breath, urging her pulse to slow. This was supposed to be a quiet life, point A to point B, no complications. Yet here she was, running from a confrontation she couldn't ignore. Her old skills had proven she could handle herself, but it came with a price. She'd shown her hand. Now the Steel Vipers knew she wasn't just another helpless truck driver. The question that loomed large was what they would do with that information, and how far they'd go to regain their pride. Dee Dee continued down the rain-soaked highway, the tension in her shoulders refusing to ease. Her mind churned with questions about what would happen next. She couldn't exactly stop living her life or stop delivering cargo. Her livelihood depended on it. Yet she was certain the Steel Vipers would come seeking revenge. She had humiliated them, and gangs like that didn't let such humiliation go unpunished. She considered her options. Calling the authorities could provide some documentation of the altercation, but it could also open a can of worms regarding her military past. Local police might not have the resources to take on a well-armed biker gang, and any deeper federal involvement could lead to her background coming under scrutiny. She preferred to operate under the radar. The hum of the tires against wet pavement offered a kind of rhythm, giving her something to focus on besides her racing thoughts. Memories of past missions filtered through her mind. Ambushes in desert towns, night ops under monsoon rains, infiltration exercises in sweltering jungles. She had always been good at controlling the case, turning fear into fuel. Maybe that was what she needed to do now. After several hours of driving, and once the skies had finally begun to clear, she stopped at a large rest area known to be a frequented spot for truckers. The sun peeked through receding storm clouds, sending shafts of golden light across the damp landscape. She parked in a far corner, away from the bulk of the vehicles, and killed the engine. Stepping into the fresh post-rain air, she opened the side compartment of her truck and rummaged around until she found what she was looking for: a discreet duffel bag. Inside lay her personal security measures, more advanced gear than a typical trucker would carry. She hadn't touched most of it in years, but it was maintained religiously, oil changed, ammunition rotated, knives kept sharpened. There were times she'd questioned why she still held on to these remnants of her old life. Now she felt vindicated for her caution. Dee Dee spent the next hour quietly ensuring her weapons were in working order. She stored them in strategic places within the cab, ready to be accessed at a moment's notice, but still out of plain sight. Pepper spray, baton, and a well-maintained 9mm sidearm were her immediate go-tos. She also kept a compact shotgun hidden under the bunk. Extreme, perhaps, but if the steel vipers came after her in force, she needed to be prepared. As she worked, her mind drifted to the broader picture. This wasn't just about self-defense now. The steel vipers were known to terrorize small communities and travelers alike. If she simply evaded them, they would continue their extortion, intimidation, and violence elsewhere. She felt a moral weight pressing on her, a sense of responsibility that had been drilled into her during her Navy years. Protect the innocent, stand up against bullies. She considered calling a friend from her old unit. It had been years since she'd spoken with any of them, but they would pick up the phone if she called. That was the bond they shared, forged under life-or-death conditions. Yet she hesitated. Dragging others into this fight could complicate matters. She also wondered if it was pride holding her back. Did she want to prove to herself that she could handle this alone? By the time dusk arrived, she'd made a decision. She wasn't going to cower and wait for the steel vipers to find her. She would take the fight to them on her terms, but she would do so smartly, gathering intel first. She recalled overhearing rumors among truckers about the gang's hideouts, warehouses near the state border, abandoned lots where they hosted underground bike rallies, bars they frequented. If she could confirm their locations, maybe she could expose them to local authorities or set up a sting. Her old operative mind buzzed with possibilities. As darkness fell, Dee Dee tucked her phone into her pocket and climbed down from her truck. The rest area lights hummed overhead, illuminating other drivers eating meals in their cabs, reading newspapers, or chatting by picnic tables. To them, she was just another traveler grabbing a quick rest. They had no idea that under her unassuming exterior, a plan was forming, one that would tip the scales against a ruthless biker gang. She breathed in the cool air and felt a familiar sense of mission rising in her chest. This time, there was no commanding officer, no official briefing, no national security on the line. It was personal. She was defending her route, her lifestyle, and possibly other innocents who'd crossed the Steel Viper's path. The sense of purpose steadied her. She might be just one person against an entire gang, but she'd faced worse odds before. And now she would do it again, on her own terms, with all the skill and resolve that only a former Navy SEAL could bring. Looking back, Dee Dee's journey shows that true strength often hides beneath an ordinary facade. She stood firm against the Steel Vipers, proving that resilience, courage, and solidarity can overcome even the darkest threats. In protecting her route and those who share the road, she reclaimed not only her confidence, but also the spirit of her Navy SEAL days, defending what matters most. Her bravery leaves us with a powerful lesson. Sometimes the quietest voices have the loudest impact when they choose to stand up and fight. We hope you've enjoyed following Dee Dee's story from start to finish. Let us know what you think. Drop your comments, share your perspectives, and let's keep the discussion going. If you want more tales of unexpected heroism, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our upcoming adventures. Thank you for being part of our community, and we look forward to hearing your thoughts.